Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's time for another book review, and this time we're delving into a whole different genre, particularly the horror genre, and I'm going to review a book by a particular author that you may have heard of, Stephen King's Under the Dome. And kind of a little joke I put in there. Hopefully, if you haven't heard of Stephen King, I don't know. Yeah, anyway. So where can I start with this book? First of all, here's something I gotta say. With as popular as Stephen King is, I unfortunately have not read a whole lot of books by Stephen King. I've watched and seen, like many other people in America, a lot of adaptations of his books in movies and TV shows and stuff like that. I've seen quite a bit, especially growing up. And Stephen King, I guess, kind of eluded me for a long time growing up because I really stuck to, especially getting into reading, I really stuck to a lot of different certain type of genres, mainly things like fantasy and a few thrillers, but easy thrillers to me that were kind of easy to consume because to me still, and I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but Stephen King's a very acquired taste for a lot of people, and me including me. You kind of have to really be in a mood, a certain type of mood to read Stephen King. And it really depends on what year you decide to read Stephen King, because I really feel like he writes like many authors would, I would assume. He writes very different, especially in his earlier works, than he does in his later works. And that's probably very obviously something that may be obvious to a lot of people. So that being said, Under the Dome was the first like major big Stephen King book that I picked up off the shelf and just decided to read. And I just saw it and I felt like I was in the mood to read something pretty big and drawn out. And so I was like, oh, here's this next huge big thriller by Stephen King, and I'll go ahead and pick it up. Now, a couple of things that I want to get off the bat really quick, and there's a couple of aesthetic things that this book does that I like. One of them is it both has a map of the town of Chester Mill where the book takes place, and it has a cast of characters on the next page that kind of helps you keep tab of all the different characters that are in this story. And like many of big thick novels that Stephen King writes, there's usually a lot of characters, but I liked that he did this because it really helps you keep track of a lot of the characters in this book. So what is Under the Dome about? I'm sure a lot of y'all have probably, if y'all have not read this book, I'm sure a lot of y'all heard about it, especially from a recent TV show that it was adapted into not long ago. I didn't watch the show. I didn't really care about to watch the show. I heard some interesting things about the show, so I really didn't care to watch the show. So needless to say, this is not going to be like a comparison between the two. Basically, the synopsis is basically there's this town of Chester Mill in Maine, go figure, and one day, basically this huge dome, this transparent dome that no one can see, basically shields the entire town. It basically just comes out of nowhere, and it's like very firm and steadfast. It can't be penetrated. Nothing can get in or out. It's basically indestructible, and like even to the point when it first gets put up, people or things that were unfortunately in the way of the barrier as it was coming down, unfortunately, like met their demise in very horrible ways. There's like depictions of like it chopping through planes and cars and livestock and birds and stuff like that, and that gets depicted very early in the book. And the story itself centers around a character named Dale Barbara, and he usually goes by Barb in this book. And he's basically he's basically like, I guess we could say like any typical type of Stephen King protagonist that you can think of. Though I will say one thing about Dale, which I'll get into in a minute, is that Stephen King, I guess, may have deliberately decided to write him way differently than he wrote some of his protagonists, because Dale himself is not, he's probably the most, in my opinion, the most Mary Sue-ist protagonist that Stephen King may have written. So if you're kind of aware of how Stephen King does his writing style, you may be kind of off put by how he decides to write the main character of Barbara. But that's just one little tidbit of information. One thing I can honestly probably say with good confirmation is, even though the Under the Dome has an interesting concept, and it's still a good book, considering Stephen King still put a lot of effort into it, it's still pretty entertaining. It still has a lot of things going for it. It's probably still not going to feel as strong of a book as some of his other work, such as it's not going to be anywhere near as compared to books like The Stand or Insomnia or It. Those books are probably going to be seen as way better than Under the Dome. But despite that, Under the Dome is a quintessential Stephen King magnus opus books. It's one of his common 1,000-page books that he likes to write every once in a while, and it takes a lot of commitment to get through this book, I must say. However, I found it kind of easy to read, honestly, considering, I'm in a certain mood to read Stephen King. I got through this book relatively easily. Stephen King does what he does best, and he has these weird times to put in exposition and weird anecdotes and stuff that's kind of weird as how he describes the scene. I don't mean that as like in a bad way. It's just how Stephen King is in his style. I'm not trying to hate on Stephen King, all you Stephen King fans. I like Stephen King, but Stephen King is one of those things where if I had to be in the mood to read Stephen King, and that's just that. But when I am, though, it's very much a fun ride along the way. And continuing with the synopsis, after the dome comes down, basically what happens is this town of Chester Mill is kind of run by a people of appointed people known as selectmen, and they're put on this council to basically handle all the affairs of the town. There's this one character who happens to be the villain. His name is Jim Rennie. He goes by the name Big Jim Rennie, and oh my gosh. Okay, so he's basically trying all his willpower to basically have control of the town and basically become the leader of this town, because you have to understand, no one can get into the town with the dome around. There's, you'll read scenarios of like news reports and stuff that's happening in the news about the dome coming down. The military gets involved, the Pentagon and government gets involved, all this stuff gets involved, but no one can get inside the dome. Also, the dome itself is completely it's not perforous. Air and stuff like that can't get out, and air can't get in, and there's a growing danger that's growing because things like carbon dioxide and methane emissions and stuff like that are constantly being released in the town, and slowly the townspeople are going to suffocate if they don't do anything about making the dome go away. And there's always that ticking time bomb that's always going on as the book is going along. And going back to Jim, many people may feel like they like Under the Dome more than maybe some of Stephen King's more fantastical type of books, because it's a book that's for the most part based in realism, and I'll get into that in a minute, but for the most part is based in realism. The villain is basically an ordinary guy, but he's an ordinary guy that has a very different sense of morals and values that are very much at odds with other people there, to the point where it's uniquely dangerous. It's basically a situation where it's a nightmare scenario where this, mysterious, horrifying nightmare occurs to this town. It's cut off from the rest of the world. Resources are limited. There's only a limited amount of water and food and even air that's in use for people that are in the town. They're confused. They're scared. They don't know who to look up to. They don't know who to lead them. And all this chaos and stuff is going on. And basically someone like Pat Robinson is in charge. And I'm kind of joking when I say that. Not really, but I am kind of joking. But he is very much, there's very much a dig into Stephen King doesn't hold back anything as far as digging into like the fanatical religious aspect of this, because Jim is very much ruled by his morals and his values as a religious person, and to the point where it's dangerous. And that's what makes him, to a lot of people who may have read this book, he may be seen as one of the most terrifying villains that Stephen King has ever written, because he is someone we've all known and probably met and probably watched on TV. You get what I'm saying. The pacing of the book is relatively good for a Stephen King novel. Stephen King's pretty good as far as keeping the flow of things going. Even if it feels like it's supposed to be a slow moment, it's not. But I will feel like in this book, it starts off very strong, because obviously, like, the second page is about the dome coming down. And it starts off strong for a long time, where people are confused and scared, and all these horrific situations are going on. They're trying to gather up as much information as they can. Then it takes a dive, because then things start to slow down as far as, like, they're now kind of settling into their new situation, and they're kind of going across all these dead ends as far as how the dome's there, why it's there, how to take it down, and then of course it picks back up with the climax of the book. So it's good in that aspect. It's okay in the aspect as far as keeping the pacing involved, but you may feel like it dips in action, especially midway through the book. There is one unfortunate, glaring problem that this book has, and many people may not see it as a big issue, but some, from what I've read, do see it as a pretty big issue, and that the ending is not anticlimactic, but is something that was a million miles from where they thought it was going to go, but in a bad way. It's essentially where we have a book based in realism, based in something that probably could happen, based in an almost real-world scenario, and then the ending just takes you completely out of it. And a lot of people are probably going to have issues with that. Now, I'm looking at it, too, from the sense of, Stephen King's books are all supposed to take place within a universe that he's created. And so as far as why the dome is there, if it has something to do with stuff that he's established in previously written works, then that obviously will make sense as well. And so obviously don't throw things at the screen if you're kind of yelling at me like that was the whole point of the ending. But you have to understand, if you're kind of reading this book as a standalone book, you're probably going to be totally lost and off put by the ending of the book. So just be prepared about that going in, is all I'm really saying. Other than that, it's a book that takes a lot of commitment to get through, because it's a large book. It's 1,000 pages. Typical Stephen King book. If you're in the mood for Stephen King or a fan of Stephen King, it's still a worthy book of picking up. It's not bad in the sense. It's not bad in any sense of the word, but it is not by any means either his strongest book that he's ever written either. So just take that with a grain of salt, if you will. So anyway, guys, that is my review of Stephen King's Under the Dome. Please stay tuned for more videos and more book reviews to come.